don't know what's up with that remote. Anyway, coming back, let's get started all over again. This was a favorite movie of mine, and I just love the whole Indiana Jones saga. I like everything about it, but this particular scene in that first of those movies, he's finally found the Well of Souls, which is basically a tomb that has been covered over with sand all of those years. And he cleans off the top. They get the rock moved, and he has this torch, and he drops it down in there, way down at the bottom. And he sees snakes. Now, let's be honest. Indiana Jones is basically Superman with a leather jacket, a whip, and of course, you got to have the wool fedora. And he's looking down into that pit, that tomb, and he says, snakes. Why did it have to be snakes? Sala is a good friend of his, and he leans next to Indy and he says, asps, very dangerous. You go first. I've had a few friends like Sala, but that's not the point of this particular lesson. Snakes throughout time have been something many people have feared, have disliked, have not been their favorite animal by any means. And generally speaking, throughout the Bible, snakes are also described in a very evil way. Some of you may remember Scott Johnson, who preaches at the Crosspoint Church of Christ over in Middletown, Ohio. Scott posted a picture of Mary, the mother of Jesus, giving comfort to Eve. And the caption under that picture was, always remember, there is hope. Things don't have to be the way they are. This isn't the end of your story. God is restoring. And I loved that imagery of seeing that picture from Eve with the snake wrapped around her foot, all the way up to Mary. When sin entered the world, it was Satan in the form of a serpent that would deceive Eve and Adam. And what sin brought into this world was death. Pain, suffering, hardship, evil, all the negatives that we can think of, sin brought into this world, but death was the consequence of sin. This morning I want to take you to another story, a story that deals with death and serpents, because there's some things that I needed to hear in this particular lesson, and I hope God can speak to you also. But the story begins, the text begins in Numbers chapter 21. Beginning with verse 4, and it says, from Mount Hor they set out by way of the Red Sea to go around to the land of Edom. And the people became impatient. And the people spoke against God and against Moses on the way. Why have you brought us up out of Egypt to die in the wilderness? For there is no food and no water, and we loathe this worthless food. God calls this particular group of Israelites stiff-necked and stubborn people. But as I sat with this text, I have to tell you, if you would take the last 40 years of my life and you would say, okay, I'm going to just make some points along the way, how many times would you find me as stiff-necked? How many times would you find me as rebellious or stubborn? How many times would you find me complaining even though I live in a land of plenty. How many times would you hear me say things like, well, I just don't have, and then fill in the blank? Or I really don't like, and then fill in the blank? Or what I have isn't as good as, and then you can figure out what comes next. The sin that these people committed, the sin that was recorded for us here, is that the people spoke against God and against Moses. How many times have I spoken against church leaders because I disliked something that wasn't sin or non-sin? I just didn't like it. How many times have I grumbled against God and felt like God should do more for me than what I have been given in any particular moment in time? And I'm not trying to defend their actions by any means. I need to make sure that I am honest with what God is saying in His Word and applying it to me. When they spoke against God and against Moses, in essence, what they said is this: God, you're not enough for us. You're not good enough. You don't provide enough. You aren't what we desire. Egypt? They were slaves there. It's one thing to take a look back at your life before you became a Christian. And sadly, I would say that there are some who romanticize that past or think about the sin that they were in a way that they wish they could be a part of that, but they know kind of as a Christian they shouldn't be doing that anymore. But their heart really leans back for that particular sin or sins. Sometimes I wouldn't put it in those words, but I would say God just isn't enough. And God doesn't sustain me. In chapter 14, just before this, when the spies came back from spying out the land of Canaan, they made a statement. They said, let us choose a leader and go back to Egypt. Let me tell you, you don't need a leader to go backwards. You've already been there and you know the way. And you don't really need a leader to sit there if you plan to do nothing. But you do need a leader. You do need God if you plan to go forward. These people said, I'd rather go back to Egypt. Let's find someone that can take us backwards. These people loathed the manna that God had given them. Did times change? Well, fast forward 1,500 years. Jesus, I really appreciate what Truett was doing at the Lord's Supper, because we're actually in the same text, John chapter 6. Jesus is talking to the people about the manna that came down from heaven. They ate of it as he was reading and died. Jesus says, I am the bread of life. And that you must eat of my flesh and drink of my blood if you want to live. Fast forward 2,000 years from the time of Jesus. How many of us today still look at Jesus and really don't think he's enough to sustain us? That we really don't like what he brings. I mean, we like the good, but we don't want the rules and the regulations. We don't want the transformation. We want to go to heaven. We don't want to go to hell. But we wish Jesus would just do it in a much easier way for me. Turning back Turning back is easy. So they grumble against God and against Moses. And then our story continues on in the next two verses, 6 and 7. Then the Lord sent fiery serpents among the people, and they bit the people so that many people of Israel died. And the people came to Moses and said, "We have sinned, for we have spoken against the Lord and against you. Pray to the Lord that he would take away the serpents from us." So Moses prayed for the people. Paul would say the wages of sin is death. God sent fiery serpents. I want to sin. I'll just give you the order. I want to sin. Then I want to feel bad because I sinned. Then I face the consequence of my sin, and I really don't like that. So I want God to take away the consequence of my sin, and I want him to make me feel good again. And then after I feel good, after a period of time, I sin, and I hate the fact that I sinned. And I dislike the consequences, and I want God, and it becomes a circle. There are some things that, truths that I learn in these just couple of verses. The first is, God sent the serpent. They grumbled against God and against Moses, and God sent fiery serpents among the people. There is a consequence to my sin. I can't just say, well, I'm going to pretend like it never happened. I'm going to be nice, but I'm never going to apologize. I'm never going to seek a forgiveness. What I'm going to do is just try to be a little gentler in the future until everybody is fine, and then I'm going to go back to being mean. God sent fiery serpents. They bit people, and many people died. The second thing I get from this is they knew why they were dying. It wasn't just, oh, we happen to be in a place where there's a lot of poisonous snakes. They understood what had happened. And they hated the consequence of what they have done. They knew that it was the serpents killing them. The third thing is, the ones that they grumbled against, God and Moses, are now the ones that they want to fix the problem. That just seems a little odd to me. I don't like you, but I want you to fix my problem because I'm the one that's done wrong, not you, but still, you go fix my problem. Don't get me wrong, we need to admit that we have sinned. But they make a request. Pray that the Lord would take away the serpents from us. The serpents were a direct consequence of their sin. Just look at the next two verses, 8 and 9. And the Lord said to Moses, "Make a fiery serpent and set it on a pole. And everyone who is bitten when he sees it shall live." So Moses made a bronze serpent and set it on a pole. And if a serpent bit anyone, he would look at the bronze serpent and live. Here's the worst and the best part of the story. And here's the part of the story that I don't think has changed over the last 3,500 years. God didn't take away the snakes. Did you catch that? Pray to the Lord that he would take away the serpents from us. God says to Moses, the Lord says to Moses, I want you to make this bronze pole with the snake wrapped around it, put it in the center of the camp. If someone is bitten by a snake and they look up and see the serpent on the pole, they will live. God didn't take away the snakes. When I am caught up in sin, I want God to fix the problem by taking away that which makes me sin. That's what I really want him to do. Because you see, if God just took away the temptation, I wouldn't have the temptation. God, go fix my problem. Instead, he says, let me give you a way to live instead of die. But I'm not taking away the snakes. When Jesus spoke to Nicodemus about entering into the kingdom of heaven and being born again, he closes that in John chapter 3 by telling Nicodemus, and as Moses lifted up the serpent of the wilderness, so the Son of Man must be lifted up, that whoever believes in him may have eternal life. I too have to look and live. I can't say I don't want any sin around me. I want to be totally in a perfect world, a utopia where there is nothing evil, no pain, no suffering, no death, no temptation. God says, let me give you the cross. And I want you to look to Christ. He'll pay the price. He'll pay the price of your sin, which is death. But you're going to have to believe in the one that's on the cross. Just as Moses lifted up the serpent, so the Son of Man must be lifted up. At the beginning of our sermon today, or beginning of our worship today, we read from Ephesians chapter 2. In verses 4 and 5, and we said, but because of his great love for us, God, who is rich in mercy, made us alive with Christ, even when we were dead in transgressions. It is by grace you have been saved. We all love passages like that. But even in this particular passage, it's while we were dead in our transgressions. When you take a look at all of Ephesians chapter 2 and see the greater context, he begins by just laying it out that like everybody else, there's been a time in our life when we really desired sin more than we desired God. It's what we wanted. But even before we knew what we needed, he would pay the price for us. God's desire is not so much that we just don't want to sin. God's desire is that we want him. That he's enough for us. That he sustains us. When you take a look at the story in the wilderness, I don't know if you find yourself there at all. I know I find me in that story too often. And the joy that I find is there is life when I look. When I come back to Jesus, there is life for me. All I have to do is surrender. That's what I got to do. Yes, I would like all consequences, and yes, I would like all temptation to be taken away, but God did not do that for me. Instead, God gave me a way out. It's called Jesus Christ. Are you looking to the cross? Stop the grumbling, the complaining. It's not going to fix your problem anyway. Realize what you need more than anything else as a God who loves you in spite of you and pays a price so that you can live. If we can help you to just live, then won't you come as we stand and as we sing?